All right, welcome back. Happy all the holidays, New Year 2025. You made it through apparently I brought some winter cold back from Chicago. I apologize. This is what I'm used to. I did not expect this here in Georgia. And tonight we're going to learn about some boundaries. So much fun. Before that, a few updates. We did close out the SAP survey. We are analyzing that and trying to figure out where the gaps are because I'm going to open it back for people that we didn't reach. And we're going to work with some of our teams and our family engagement specialists to figure out how to reach them so we can get some accurate information before we start developing guiding principles on the work that we're doing so we can have enough information, hopefully, from all of our constituents in the district. Dr. Horton helped us create a SAP quarterly update video. It was in his December newsletter. We will be doing those each quarter just to try to push some information directly into people's pockets and hands, and hopefully dispel some of the kind of rumor mill that's happening around the district as our work starts to bubble up and people are starting to pay more attention, which is a good thing. I have some special guests with me here tonight. So I'll let our staff introduce themselves quickly. That will be helping us a little bit. Start with Yoke.
Hi everybody, I'm David Yoke. I'm a planning manager in operations, and I do a lot with mapping and enrollment forecasting and stuff like that. I'll be speaking in part of the presentation.
I'm Hans Williams, Director of Planning and Capital Improvement Programming. Work with David on forecasts, maps, all that sort of thing. So we have a lot of redistricting experience, so Serena thought it might be a good idea for us to come and share some of that during the presentation.
I'm Kristen Drake. I'm a Senior Coordinator for Gifted Education in the Division of Student Services.
And Tori Ivey, Executive Administrator for Area 1 Schools.
So again, each meeting will be bringing more and more staff with us, obviously related to what we're talking about, like we did last time with our school choice team, as we were talking about programs and so forth. So I'm hoping in our February gathering, it'll be a meeting of the whole. It will be at AIC, that we'll get some division leaders, and I'm getting a lot of answers to questions, and then hopefully they will help clarify those too. So we'll be able to kind of shop around a little bit at that February meeting. And then thank you for any feedback. I really do appreciate those of you that look at the slides ahead of time and find things that like, hey, did you know this? Or by the way, because we do go back and edit them. So any edits that you guys have given me, we have updated those after the meeting onto the website, and then we'll reprint those as we start again rethinking about those guiding principles and what's going to ground us in our work. So I do appreciate it. All right, tonight, we are going to learn about some boundaries. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between redistricting and reimagining. We're going to explore some of those opportunities and challenges related to boundaries. Talk a little bit, or you guys are going to spend a lot of time with maps. We had a little map challenge. We were actually going to be in the cafeteria, but it is freezing in there, and I could not function that way. Like I need warmth, and we had like everything taped down, and so we actually have a lot more maps printed. But right now we made the big active map, which is all of our schools, all of our specialties. It has our middle, elementary, high, all in one map. They're printed. There's 5 of them out, so I'll direct you to those areas. We do have some smaller ones, but we just don't really have a physical place to put them. So you'll probably have to use laptops and such for those, but we do have maps. Or if you want some at your table, we have some for you guys, so you can look at them in much larger font. And then similarly, you guys have a worksheet. You'll put some information in there. We'll share out and talk about next steps and do our exit ticket. All right, so tonight's outcome is really to understand DeKalb County School District boundaries and the difference between redistricting and reimagining. Those are very different processes. So we want to make sure we ground ourselves in understanding that and spending a little bit of time about how we currently have boundaries in our district. All right, if someone would love to read, this is just something to ponder to kind of ground us in what we're going to look at tonight. Any volunteers? Yes, please.
Almost all public school systems use geographic boundaries to assign students to school. If boundaries are how we assign students to schools, there's a responsibility to review those often because families, communities, and needs change often.
So we use, in DeKalb, we use geographic-ish spaces to draw boundaries. If all of a sudden a huge population shifts, we need to review that, right? We should be doing that annually. It is a real challenge to change a boundary. There are some real impacts to that. There are real feelings around that. And so districts often don't. And then they wait 10, 15, 20 years, and then there's huge shifts, and then we have to do something large that affects everyone. If we do it more often in smaller increments, it's really less impactful to a large body of our families and school district. Okay? I think it's Yoke's turn.
Yep.
Yay. Left and right go up and down, I believe.
All right. I'm going to stay. Yeah. All right. So let's get into what is redistricting. So first we're just going to do a definition. And I wanted to point out that this gets referred to as different things such as redistricting, but also rezoning, attendance area changes, boundary changes, and other things like that. All those things are generally talking about the same process or areas. So the definition that we came up with for redistricting is the reassignment of addresses from one attendance area to another to satisfy district goals according to... Now I have two microphones. Is that going to cause... Is that going to cause feedback?
Just kidding.
To satisfy district goals according to board policy AD school attendance areas. So we're going to break down what we mean by district goals and board policy in a minute. I wanted to point out that we say addresses because your address determines your school assignment. And when we change addresses, we're not necessarily moving students. We're changing everybody in that neighborhood, whether there's a student there or not. So again, reassignment of addresses from one attendance area to another to satisfy district goals according to board policy. Now, why redistricting? Or in other words, what district goals can redistricting address? The slide has some thoughts about redistricting, but generally redistricting is needed to, one, create new attendance areas for new schools, balance enrollment between schools, reassigning from overcrowded schools to undercrowded or under-enrolled schools, and three, to improve conditions for students. I would put in that bucket removing portable classrooms from campus, shortening student travel times, increasing walk and bike opportunities, and so forth. So that said, we're not going to focus too much on that. We're going to go deep into the policy. All right, so attendance areas and redistricting are governed by board policy AD. On the slide, we see a full text of the policy, and I've also included a link there at the bottom if you wanted to look it up on your phone or laptop to read the full text. The policy establishes attendance areas for each school and lists criteria for the alteration of school attendance areas, in other words, redistricting, which are listed on the side there as proximity, capacity, and enrollment. So first, proximity. I take that to mean students should be assigned to the nearest school or at least a school within a reasonable distance. For example, we wouldn't want to redistrict from the overcrowded Cross Keys High School here to the under-enrolled McNair High School because that's an unreasonable distance, even though it would solve the problem of the overcrowding.
Can I ask a question? Is there any point where you define like what is considered an unreasonable distance?
That's not defined in the policy, so that would probably be defined in each redistricting process, basically.
But there's never been like a best practice and we never want 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. Yeah, we never want people to.
Like a maximum distance to a school? No.
Yeah, what's
not that I know.
considered proximity kind of versus?
So I take it to mean the primarily the closest, maybe the next closest, maybe the third closest.
But it's not defined in policy.
There's not a.
The committee, I think, could define that, though. That might be a...
We could recommend.
This committee, yeah.
We could recommend.
Recommend it, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
just physical distance, it's also bus routes. So proximity is not one variable, it depends on the circumstance.
Yeah,
Safety and traffic patterns not considered a secondary?
That'll come on to
On the next-
in the secondary.
the other
later slide.
criteria.
Right. These are just the primary. This is what we primarily look at when we're establishing attendance areas. So number 2 is capacity, which is stated as instructional capacity. That means the number of students can be scheduled in the building with instructional programs. That includes your specials, connections, special education, CTAE, and so forth. And note that the instructional capacity is not the safe maximum occupancy of the building, according to like the fire marshal, but it's operational capacity that you can schedule in the building reasonably or comfortably. So sure.
In both of these, are the numbering priority or are they bullet points effectively?
I believe they're bullet points. I don't think there's a order necessary. They all kind of interact with each other. And number 3 is enrollment. So this includes the current enrollment, but also changes that are expected from new development, neighborhood cycles, anything in an enrollment forecast, all the different variables that we look at. And we try to look a few years out to make sure we're not creating an immediate problem. Of course, the farther you go out, the more uncertainty we have, the more we don't really know what's going to happen, and we might as well just see what happens. So the 3 primary criteria interact with each other, as I said. So I would summarize these 3 together as students should be assigned to the nearest school with capacity. So we'll move on
So
to,
there's nothing in that about, like, cluster patterns or split fee, there's nothing in the policy?
Not in the
not on the
policy.
primary,
Silent.
not on the primary criteria, right.
Have you guys ever separately defined, I don't know the official word, but the magnet programs, the specialty programs? I forgot the word for those.
School choice
School
programs?
choice. Yeah, have you ever separately defined that, like, do those have to follow the same criteria?
No.
Well, this is
Not-
only in, these
well,
are
definitely not
only schools with
proximity.
attendance areas.
This
so
is
if they
just
don't have an
attendance boundaries.
area, That's outside that scope.
Because kids, well, we all know the transportation is a real issue with the school choice piece right now, right? So that's definitely not, proximity I know is not one of them.
But is that's by definition proximity, should it be one of them for those programs? Like, is that just coincidentally where we're at, or is that a specific, thoughtful, and
I think these are only designed for schools that are neighborhood schools. There's a separate policy for school choice, but it has very little to do with these primary criterias.
I mean, the reason I'm asking is that obviously, I mean, some of the school choice programs are why a school's overcrowded, right? If you pulled that and put it somewhere else, you've got
Oh, right.
not a capacity issue.
Sure. And we'll get to some of that in the secondary criteria or other criteria. So next, the policy lists out other criteria. And it says that, it states specifically that these only apply when the primary criteria point to multiple options. To me, that means if every student could be assigned to their closest school without overcrowding a school, without making the school only have 50 kids in it, then you should do that. If you can't, then you evaluate your options based on these things. That said, I've tried it several times, it never works out. You're not even close if you're just sending kids to their nearest school. You will end up with schools with only 50 kids and others with 4,000 kids. So these criteria are in no particular order, and we use these as considerations when we're evaluating when we have multiple options of which direction we may want to go. So I'm going to go through each briefly and give an example or two of how these are applied. So first, consider safety and traffic patterns. So perhaps when you're choosing between 2 options, you might pick the one that doesn't send kids across I-85 because of the safety and traffic concerns there. 2, consider previous redistricting. Perhaps when choosing between 2 options, you pick the one You don't go with one that would move kids that were just redistricted 2 years ago to where like during their elementary career they've been redistricted twice. Really would rather avoid doing that to those students. Consider the impact to intact neighborhoods. So perhaps splitting a community such as an apartment complex with multiple entrances, maybe you don't want to do that. And if one of the options doesn't do that, maybe go with the one that doesn't do that. Or drawing a line between like two homes in a neighborhood to where like the neighbor you can see out your window is a different school. 4 is special programs. So an example of how that applies is one school may function well at up to over 100% of their capacity, maybe 101% of their capacity, while another is really cramped at 95% capacity because of their programs. So schools have different program offerings, different stuff that the district hosts, such as the choice programs. So every school is different and should be considered differently with their special programs. Facility condition. You might look at maxing out enrollment at the school that was just built in 2020 and not the school that was built in 1955.
I was going to say a good example of that actually is a redistricting that's going on right now, the final meeting of which is tomorrow at Idlewood Elementary, which has a major renovation that will be happening starting in the next year or so. And as part of that, we're taking that renovation into account during this redistricting process because the school is also overcrowded. And we're intentionally making a recommendation to not just move out the number of students needed to bring them below their capacity, but well below the capacity, which gives enough swing space inside the school to reduce impact to instruction during a major renovation. So that's the kind of consideration you might make for school capacity.
Great, thanks, Hans.
Is that a permanent? Will that be is that permanent?
Until further notice.
Until further, absolutely, the expectation is that there will need to be another redistricting for balancing in the area, but by that time the SAP committees will be up and running, and so, it won't be.
Post-renovation, you've moved them out. Post-renovation, filling that back up will have to be taken into consideration, correct?
Yes, yeah, the expectation is.
That school is done around the same time our recommendation. So we'll be bringing that into our fold to say like, hey, this area is pretty overcrowded.
Yep.
We need to be looking at that.
Yeah, in fact, because we are, because we're not swinging the entire school out, which is another option. When we can, we try to do that. Often we don't have another place to put a whole school. Because of that, it often lengthens the amount of time. And so I would actually be willing to bet there'll be one round of recommendations coming out of SAP, and the changes that would be needed that would help balance enrollment in the area might even be from a second round out of SAP. We'll see. It'll depend on timing.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So number 6, consider school feeder patterns. So perhaps avoid sending a single neighborhood that would feed to a different middle school than the rest of their peers in their elementary school. 7, consider efficiency. So minimize the number of buses you need, the fuel use for the running buses in the area, or consider if you are consolidating closing schools that are more costly to maintain and run than those that are not. And then lastly is kind of a catch-all, leave some space to add criteria as necessary as long as it's communicated to the public and the board. And those would be guided by the superintendent. So some examples of that was there's often pressure, or there's often a stated goal of limiting the number of students we're moving to achieve the goal, to limit disruption, or to increase equity so that we're not only affecting a certain demographic when we're making a change. Sure?
It was actually on the prior slide, but there was one of the points was instructional capacity. Is there, just like there's not a definition of proximity, is there a definition of what is allowed for instructional capacity? For example, there are some school choice magnet programs that are over 100%, over 125% capacity. If it's a choice, that seems to be decided it will be over capacity. So is there a limit that exists, or is it whatever is decided?
Like an absolute limit, like
we
we can't
go
do
over
this.
150%, that's just silly to have kids crammed into 100% capacity schools.
I don't think so. There's one that didn't Eric say there was like a,
No.
Okay. Okay.
There is no limit.
Even with school choice, like even with the magnet program where they have the
So
opportunity.
for school choice, and this is a change this year, I have made it very clear that we are not putting more kids in spaces where schools are overcrowded.
Yeah.
We just can't. That has not been a practice, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
We
So it's
had,
no.
our wonderful, very smart friend here, David, created a school choice calculator for us this year. Yay, give it up for David. It's a lot of work. Where we took our FTEs, the capacity of the school, the number of kids that are gonna roll over, and said, and what's left?
Perfect. Okay.
I don't know why that has not happened. We are doing a lot more collaboration to try to limit the overcrowding in spaces where we have choice, to your point. The flip side is, the policy says if you live here, you get to go to school here. Don't have choice there, right? But I do think if there's extra programs in a school that we have choice to place kids in, we have some control over that, and we're trying to baby step our way into minimizing that as much as possible,
Is magnet considered a choice?
depending on the school.
Yes.
well,
But yeah,
magnets
it
always.
is a school choice, right, yes. But some are in schools and some are their own buildings.
But I think the number of magnet
Oh.
spots available in a school can
Yeah,
be known by looking at the attendance zone, right?
Yes.
Like, if at 100% because of attendance, how
Then
much
there's
room
no
do you
more
have for
spots
magnet?
Right.
And
It
then
should
you
be zero.
wouldn't let
Something
people that are already in the magnet program. That's what I'm wondering.
No,
Is
they're there,
Yeah.
they're there.
Well, and
already in.
We're not gonna take this out of the school.
Yeah, and so things like what you're describing are actually a big part of why it's taken so many months to talk about this, because absolutely, if you have an overcrowded school, that, say you have an overcrowded high school, and there's a magnet program where students are able to automatically matriculate from middle to high, if the school already is filled with neighborhood students who live in the area, and then on top of that you have students that came into a magnet program at another school and get to automatically matriculate, yes, absolutely, that will overcrowd the school.
And that means we have nothing left for school choice.
Well, what it means is there won't be any additional open seats, but it also means we can't reduce the number of students by artificially picking students who no longer get to be here.
But you could decide, and I'm asking if this is the sort of
Thing that we're doing.
reimagining we can do. You could say, we have so many schools on the south side of Atlanta that are way under capacity. We take a magnet program that's in an overcrowded school and we move it to an undercrowded school.
That
Yes.
is
In
definitely
theory.
some type of
Sure.
recommendation we can come.
Yes, that gets back to, as Sarita was saying, reviewing this often, and then also back to moving a program, which depending on the kind of program and the size of program, like if you're talking about like a regional special ed program, that's something that the district actually looks at more frequently, potentially to move out of an overcrowded school. Whereas something like a school choice program, it's possible but less frequent. But it's a big enough thing, and it has a big enough impact on many different things that it's so far been, as kind of Sarita said, it's a politically fraught thing. It's up there with redistricting when it comes to moving whole programs, but because all of this is so interconnected, that's why there's been a need for something like the SAP process, because you can't really look at one program in isolation or one area redistricting in isolation. It really needs to be, how does all of these pieces fit together? So, sorry,
We're
I'm
running behind, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna speed us through some of this.
Yep.
We can get to the walking around and having some more in-depth conversations.
Okay. Yeah, I'll glance over this one, that students in 5th, 8th, and 11th grade are allowed to remain at their school after redistricting with no transportation. This slide shows a timeline for about the last 20 years of the redistricting processes that have been completed. And so you see, like, especially through here, like we were doing it basically every year somewhere. We were redistricting, but we haven't really done it since 2020 except for Kerry Reynolds. And the last major redistricting we did that touched the whole district was in 2011 when several schools were closed. They're listed here. And yeah, there's basically recommendations to change attendance areas all over the district.
Yeah.
So there was a redistricting project in 2019. It was very large, and it
Yeah, that was
very,
for the
very-
new John
no,
Lewis.
No. It was the entire DeKalb schools. It was and it got very far into the process. My family was going to be moved schools.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's impacting our area.
It was, yeah, so it was COVID that stopped that process, or it would have gone into effect. So there was a very large scale.
So 2020, we did three redistricting processes that fall for the new Austin, new Doraville, and new Pleasantdale. What happened was, it was right before COVID. The superintendent at the time decided to go with a kind of temporary plan to achieve the immediate goals, and then do the CMP process to like do a real
Yeah.
district-wide
This is a
district.
large scale.
I
Yeah,
think
this
what,
was-
Just
what
like one school or one neighborhood.
Yeah, what you're thinking about, we called it the secondary school process or study, and what that looked at was what was going to be the future of, and this was during the how do we redo SPLOST 5 sort of thing. And so yes, it was huge. It was many meetings all across the district looking at what we wanted middle and high schools to look like. But I think the difference was that wasn't a redistricting process per se. Like no redistricting recommendations came out of it. What came out of it were recommendations for, here's what middle and high schools should look like, and if you do this, you will need to do redistricting. And so redistricting was talked about because, if you're going to recommend building a new school or a new addition, it kind of requires redistricting in order to make that happen. But that wasn't itself a redistricting process. No redistricting recommendations. The only redistricting recommendations in 2019 were John Lewis.
Well, let me be clear. So these numbers are when they became active.
Yeah.
So this was in 2019.
Yes.
This new
Austin
Austin,
and
new
new
Doraville.
Doraville, yes.
And we also did a process for Pleasantdale as well.
Yes.
There was a Druid Hills cluster, elementary redistricting.
That is.
That was
I don't see it on there.
the John Lewis. It impacted the Druid Hills cluster.
It was during this. Yeah.
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 I should have listed that specifically.
It was kind of a two-part, because John Lewis had already opened and those kids had moved out of Burbank, and then it was like a year later that we started doing the
Yeah. It's.
redistricting to refill Burbank.
Yeah, one of the things that is not easy to see, as you say, when John Lewis opened initially, what was it? Right before John Lewis opened, the students that were going to go to John Lewis were going to Fernbank, and so therefore, when John Lewis opened, it by necessity changed the Fernbank attendance area, which kind of opened up the rest of the Druid Hills cluster. Although I think the recommendation then was. There weren't changes at the time, but
No, there was.
there was. Okay,
But
then yeah.
it was concurrent.
Okay.
It was concurrent with the John Lewis. That's why I ended up not stating it specifically.
Oh, okay. We should have that on there.
But I'll add that on there. But yeah, non-exhaustive list either.
Yes. Well, I think that there's 2 points. We do redistricting, but I think it's also important, as you said, that with the exception of 2011 and 2008, while there's been lots of things where we look at big areas, the actual impact tends to be a lot more focused on specific
It's
areas.
very reactionary.
Yes.
In the past is what it appears to be.
Yes, that is a very good word for
And
it.
local.
And
yeah.
not communicated well. Like it just sort of surprises everyone. It pops up and is like, this is about to happen, and all of a sudden the community, if they don't get loud, something just quietly goes through. It's how it's perceived, I think, from what I was reading.
Okay, so I'll move on. So this is a fun graphic, and I'll have to talk through it a little bit, sorry. So this is trying to show changes in enrollment since that 2011 when we looked at everything, and how much it's changed since then without a comprehensive review of the attendance areas.
Changes in residents.
Residents, yeah, it's not enrolled.
Well, they're enrolled in DeKalb schools somewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me be clear about exactly what I'm talking about. But so these are current high school attendance areas, so including any redistricting that was done over those 10 years, symbolized by how much the population. Hold on, sorry. symbolized by change in K-12 enrollment by student's address. So K-12 students by who lives in that Chamblee cluster is what
And
that's
it's
showing.
actual students, so it wouldn't show like home growth if they don't have kids. Like, it's
Right.
not residents.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the question that I would have on this, and I look at, my first thought is this a reflection of population change, or is this a reflection of various people choosing to maybe have their kids go to private instead?
It could be both. So that may be another meeting of what those, of what, all the different
Do you have a way
things.
to determine and say, are those about the same, or is there some places where you're seeing a decline and it's primarily population, or it's primarily people choosing not to use DeKalb County schools?
Yeah, and yeah, we can get into that at
Yeah.
at another meeting. That's, yeah.
And if a kid is in one of those areas but is attending a choice program, they would still show up in that area?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So the blue areas have increased, the red areas have declined. So we see the very dark blue Chamblee cluster with over 2,000 more students living in that area and going to DeKalb schools than to 2011. And then conversely, we see the very dark Columbia and Miller Grove clusters that have 1,500 or fewer students than 2011. And obviously, there's a trend of north and south here. The key takeaway, though, is all this change has happened. There's a very different facility demand that we have now than we had in 2011, and we haven't kept up with that change.
Since 2011, all those kids have gone through the program at this point. They're like not. This is like a two different population altogether.
Snapshot, yes.
Because it's a high school 2011
yeah.
versus high school today. Those are they're done with
Sure.
their
Yeah.
experience.
Have any of the zones changed? Has it been, no, Chamblee was increased? Have any other-
Yeah, I think Cross Keys would be the darkest blue without that change.
Yeah, I think so too.
Particularly this little panhandle there. Yeah, that's a good point.
Are you seeing this
And
also at a middle school, elementary level too? This type of increase in the north and decrease in the south?
Well, because keep in mind,
yeah.
this is where students live. It's enrollees in DeKalb schools by where they live, regardless of where they're attending. So all those elementary schools are seeing,
It's organized by like where those high schools are.
yeah,
Thank you.
It would still look pretty much the same.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
all right.
I feel like I've talked about this a lot, so I'm not going to do that slide. The real big difference is, right? Oh, thank you. The really big difference is that we want to add program information in this. We can't keep redistricting just schools and not talk about programs that are within schools or adjacent to schools. We have to bring programs into the conversation, which is tricky and personal, and we get it, but we have to talk about it. The other piece is stakeholder and community voice is real in this process. So, and I want to say, and I feel like because we're in the lottery process now, I have to say this often, just because someone doesn't get their way does not mean the process did not work. I just have to be real about that, right? Everyone's not going to get their way in this process, and that's fine, but we have to do it comprehensively, and we have to look at data, and we have to hear what people are saying. Just because we heard it doesn't mean that's necessarily what we're going to do, right? Because we have to triangulate some data, and we'll get into that a lot next fall, starting to really triangulate things so that whatever recommendation we come up with, it isn't because I said it today, it's because, we saw this 3 data points that said it, we looked at X map, and we looked at the projection, and that's how we got there, right? It also, this process also talks about just also consolidation, which isn't always a part of redistricting. It's usually, I think to Hans and Yoke's point, a specific instance or a reaction to one thing. Consolidation could be something that we talk about in this process as well. And again, triangulation as much as possible. We want data points from various areas to really bring together a actual recommendation. But boom. All right.
So I get to speak quickly about some current opportunities, challenges that we have when it comes to boundary. I'll sit over here. Boundary changes and what that means. One of the big opportunities is, especially with the SAP process, and especially being able to explicitly bring in all these different elements, looking at, not just here are the primary criteria and here's how boundaries are now, and we want to make some small change or maybe even a big change because we're doing one thing, reactionary, as you said. We have the opportunity to, I hate to say it because it's a cliche, but it is true, kind of start fresh, at least initially look at a big level and say, not just, okay, how do we want to do attendance areas, but even just, do we want to do attendance areas? Very likely the answer is yes. It is efficient in many ways, but it's still worth asking just at a 10,000 foot level, not just, oh, why do we do it this way, but why are we even doing this? And so reimagine, there's different ways of configuring schools, configuring where students go to school. This just happens to be a way that school districts traditionally have done it. As I said, there are efficiencies in geographically clustering where students go. It's a lot easier to transport. It's a lot easier to make communities. But there are downsides as well, as we have seen. Sure.
So one thing that would be helpful, and I thought about it when I was going through this stuff, where else and what are they doing differently? We get to the reimagine, we'll bring that in as we start to look at some guiding principles and stuff. David has expressed interest in doing a little white paper for us to find out what all the other school districts are doing. So we'll be bringing here are some ideas, and hopefully within proximity to the type of district we are too. Because if it works at a 10,000, student, that's not probably going to work for us. So we're going to try to find some comparison.
Absolutely, yeah. And the complexity that you're asking about there, like what's happening elsewhere, what are some examples? Because it is hard to really imagine from nothing. That's one of the big reasons why this process, like so much of the SAP process, is and will continue to be about educating ourselves, coming up with guiding principles before we even get to, okay, now let's think about recommendations, because so much kind of has to go into it first before we can confidently look at, okay, where do we actually want to start moving? But some ideas of opportunities are reimagining grade bands in schools. The district has already looked at, has already changed the grade configurations. We started 50 years ago with first through, actually even then it was changed. Some schools were first through 7th and then 8th through 12th. Other schools were first through 6th, and you had junior high school starting in, I think, 70s or 80s, but it was different in different areas, even within the same school district. So at this point, we're more or less uniformly K through, actually it's pre-K for most schools, through 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 through 12, but even then there are exceptions. And so that could apply even to neighborhood schools, because as you narrow the bandwidth of ages of students that are in a school, you can use that school more efficiently. But that has downsides, because now students are changing schools more often in their career from pre-K through 12th grade. We could imagine how we create boundaries. So, right now we have clusters. Do we do closest proximity schools? Do we keep the one-to-one, as in, everybody from the same elementary goes to the same high, that we say we do now? In fact, you'll kind of see later we don't do that everywhere. But whatever guiding principle we have for how we want to do this, we can change that. School choice options, how do we want to do that? Is that something that, because it does affect attendance areas, as you've pointed out, where you put a school choice school, whether it be in a neighborhood school or even as a standalone, this whole school is a theme school, school choice. Well, that school is now no longer a neighborhood school with an attendance area. And so some other school has to cover that attendance area, and those students have to apply to go to this choice school. All of these things have impacts. And then area boundaries. So how we do boundaries and all that. So all of these are opportunities to kind of reimagine how we organize students. Do we do it geographically? Do we do it some other way? Do we do it the way grade bands are? As I said, there are reasons why things are organized the way they are, and it wouldn't be surprising if we end up saying, let's not change things too much. But this is our opportunity to at least think about it and say, what else could there be? Some challenges are, as has kind of been pointed out, there have been a lot of changes since we've done something like this, especially looking this big, and especially where it's not just a pie in the sky of, okay, well, we want to imagine where we'll be but we don't have any real recommendations yet for what that will look like, especially as it relates to redistricting. But since we peaked, which 2018, when did we peak? Actually, it was 16, wasn't it? 2016, I think. We're about 10,000 students less than we were then. But we have more or less the same number of schools, same number of high schools, same number of elementaries. We're not significantly different there than we were then. And even if we were at our peak today, we would still have seats available district-wide. Now, as evidenced both then and now, that doesn't mean every school is not overcrowded. Where students are and where our capacity is mismatched, which is another challenge, is we have that mismatch between where we have the capacity, where we have the students, and in some cases the mismatch is so severe that it's not something that can easily be overcome just by redrawing where the lines are. As David pointed out, no matter how you kind of try and draw all students into a school within boundaries, if the way things are now, at some point, at least within the rules as they're currently set, at some point you end up with schools whose boundary is, the schools can no longer be located within its own boundary because everybody's already gone to some other closer school. So last year we had 20,000 open seats. So all of these things are things that we're looking at right now, things that we'd be looking to overcome. We have clusters of overcrowded schools, clusters of underutilized schools, and our projections are not trending up for younger grades. Our birth rates have been falling, which means that our kindergarten numbers have been falling. And on top of that, if you look from year to year, including kindergarten and 12th grade, about a third of our students change from year to year. You know, it's actually kind of amazing when you think about it, that of all the students that are in our schools right now, 1/3 of them won't be here next year. And next year, one third of our students will not have been here this year, no matter how you look at it. And so there's a lot of ins and outs, even beyond who's coming in kindergarten and matriculating up through 12th grade. In fact, actually, the students that come in kindergarten and stay all the way through 12th grade are in the minority, because most families will move at some point, and not always within DeKalb. So it's another thing to be keeping in mind is there's constantly change. DCSD has not done a holistic review of our boundaries in well over a decade. The last time there was an attempt at a true holistic look at boundaries was, I would say, probably 2011. There's been attempts along the way of looking at, okay, how do we do facilities? And yes, that'll have a boundary impact, but that wasn't really boundary changes, and you know, there weren't recommendations that came out of it. The last time there were big recommendations to change both boundaries and clusters, attendance areas, facilities, all of that was planning for SPLOS 4 in 2010 and 11.
Often related to SPLOS, I think.
It's often related to SPLOS. That's another thing that you'll hear quite a bit, is a lot of the big planning efforts have come out of our capital improvement cycle, which is related to our special purpose local option sales tax. Part of what the SAP process is going to help us do is kind of remove the redistricting and the visioning of the district. Who do we want to be, and how do we want to get there as a district, from, well, what money do we have to build new schools? Because in reality, where you want to build is, needs to match the vision, not the vision matching the build. Yes?
I just want to comment on the 2011 redistricting. That was an attempt, but it was not a holistic anything.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of recommendations. There were the redistricting resulted. There were kids in underutilized schools that stayed in underutilized schools, and some schools went from crowded to overcrowded. For example, Evansdale Elementary was redistricted. We were told, oh, you'll get 60 kids, then you'll just be above the capacity. We got 120, and we were at 125% capacity. So that redistricting at that time did not solve more problems than it created.
Mm-hmm.
Like we haven't looked farther back to the last time they actually looked at it holistically.
Yes, and I would absolutely agree. There were even recommendations made at the time that at the board meeting to approve it, the board struck down those recommendations. And so even if it had been holistic, which I agree with you, probably wasn't at the time, things were changed at the last second to make it not so. And that was the last time we tried. not successfully, but that was still the last time we actually tried at that level. So that's one of the challenges, is there's a lot of backlog looking at all of these questions. That's why we're spending months just kind of going through hey, this is the way things are. We'll spend more months looking at, in general, where do we want to go? How do we want to go? Not where. How do we want to get to where we want to be? Before we even get to, okay, now let's look at real recommendations. Because it's when you have this much of a backlog in these many areas that are so interconnected, it takes a while to pull everything out and to be able to say with any real confidence, this is where we want to try and get to. All right, so DCSD demographics. I think a lot of you, have you shown this to them before? Okay, so this is just kind of reiterating what you guys have seen before. The big thing that I think is really interesting to look at, I really want to put this up on my wall in my office, is really the geographic clustering of students. And you can get a feel for, even though this only shows the high schools, you still kind of get an idea that where our schools are, where our physical capacity for students are, and where the students live don't perfectly match up, and never will. And so that's one of the big challenges when it comes to redistricting. And then taking into account all of the other different factors up to and including, let's see, low income, race. This says Spanish, and I always berate David for, it shouldn't have been Spanish, it should have been non-English speakers, because there's a big cluster along Beaufort Highway, sure, but there's actually another really big cluster in Clarkston. They just don't speak Spanish, they speak other languages. So that's another element to keep in mind, that we have services for students that are clustered in specific areas, and that's something to keep in mind when we do redistricting, that you don't want to take one little apartment complex over from one place to another without taking these things into account. Otherwise, you might be taking students away from services, the easiest way to get those services. Conversely, maybe we need to spread out the way we deliver those services. I don't know. That's what the SAP process is here to help make recommendations about. Yes?
I didn't see it in here. I don't know if you have maps that would show projected population changes in years.
Yes. Well, I say yes. We're in the middle of making those for the next 10 years. We do a forecast every year. And generally we do a 1-year forecast and a 7-year forecast. Our current forecast is about a year old, and we're about a month out from having our next forecast. So, give us a little bit to get that. Yes? So second question first, we absolutely try to take it into consideration. Are we able to project it? Not with confidence. We try, we really do. But the reality is there's so many different factors that go into that even keeping an eye out on, here's the high level national, here's the local level changes that are happening. The resources and proficiency of local organizations in being able to bring in and help process immigrants, refugees, or whatever special populations that you're talking about, that has more of an impact than people think on how many of those are going to send their kids to public schools. And all of that is some things that we try to take into account, but the reality is things shift and change so often that more often than not, we don't see it until 100 more or less students show up than what we expected.
Legally, you can't ask. You can't ask if a family or a child is in the country legally or not in the country legally. So I don't even know, where would you get that data?
We try and talk with community organizations. So like in the Beaufort Highway corridor, there's several different community organizations that work with immigrant communities, and those are the folks that we work with. Because they're the ones that talk with their families and can get a better idea of not just what are individual families, what decisions are they making, but what we really need to know is how are those decisions changing? Are there less families moving into the Beaufort Highway corridor because rents have gone up, or because there just isn't, whatever factors were leading them to move there in the first place aren't there anymore? Or is it the reverse, that more and more are going to continue to come because that's where their family and where their community is. That's where the resources they're able to take advantage of are. You're right, we can't get those directly from families, and we're not, honestly, it's me and David most of the time, we're not set up to do that. But what we can do is meet with and talk with the organizations that help service those communities. Same thing with refugee families and communities, yes.
Have you guys had the opportunity to look back at the accuracy of your forecast and have a plus and minus to help us understand, hey, they're 95% accurate?
Yes, so David has a whole folder on forecast accuracy. Generally, we're within about 1%, which sounds great, but we're also talking about 100,000 students.
Yeah.
And the reality is schools and, when you're looking at even just textbooks, how many textbooks does a school need? They need to know school by school, grade by grade, within plus or minus 20 students, how many students do you expect? Because that's going to impact how many ninth grade math textbooks they're going to need here versus there. Now everybody involved knows that there's some error there, of course, especially with ninth grade. But that's the level we try to forecast for. And so, yeah, district-wide we're within 1%, but any one given school we may be quite a bit more off. And that's where year by year we try and look at where are we off the most and why is that going to impact next year.
Yeah, I mean, it's year to year 1%, but like 10-year, which is like what matters for building.
Oh, yeah, so I didn't even get into that. So sorry, I'll continue in just a moment. We do a 1-year forecast, a 3-year forecast, and a 7-year forecast because we recognize the 1-year forecast is usually pretty good. That's the one within 1%. By 3 years out, we expect there to be a lot more error. I wouldn't be surprised if it's more like 5%. I'd have to look at it. And while we do a 7, in fact, the reason we do 7 instead of 10, I think our next major one will be 10 just because it's a nice number. But a lot of times we only do 7 because the farther you go out, the bigger those error bars get, and it goes really, really quickly because there are so many things we don't know. There's no way we can forecast, oh, this apartment complex is going to buy this apartment complex and then run a rent special on both those areas. And so next year at Dunair Elementary, 200 more kids than forecast are going to show up. That happened. So there's just things we can't forecast. And even in the broader trends, we're hearing cross keys. How long has it been forecasted that the Buford Highway corridor is going to be renovated and all those apartment complexes are going to close? I'm sitting here at about a decade and a half personally. I might be a lot longer for other folks. So we're not set up to be able to really say, here's what will happen, especially the farther you go out. So we try and 1 year, okay, we can be pretty confident, we can see what's coming down the road. 3 years, pretty good as long as something really big doesn't change. But even we acknowledge once you get more than that, we're really just kind of aiming and hoping we get close and then adjusting along the way. Sorry, yes?
I wondered if it was possible to create a heat map similar to this that would reflect the percentage of eligible students in an area who actually do attend
Yes.
DeKalb County schools versus choose homeschool or private.
Sorry, I said yes too quickly. We have really good data on students that attend our schools. We get a 100% census every night. Everybody that's in our system, we know at least what's on record for what their address is, so we can geolocate it. That's why David was able to put together that really cool map of, based on current attendance areas, how has the enrolled students living here changed over the last 10 years, because we don't go back and say, okay, how many students were attending this school? We say, show me the dot for this student 10 years ago, and is it in the defined area? But that's only if you're enrolled. If you're homeschooled, if you're a private school student, if you're going to a state charter school, we have a lot more limited data. For homeschooling, we hope that those students or that those families report to the state. It's required, but how many folks at the state are enforcing that? For private school, we do have a bit more data because the private schools are required to report through the local school district. But even then, we're limited in our resources to call up every private school that a student living in DeKalb could go to and be like, are you sure you don't have a DeKalb student?
I've seen a chart in one of your presentations before, which broke down for every individual school, this is the number of students in X grade who reside in the area and attend their neighborhood schools
Yes.
versus how many reside in the area but attend another DeKalb County school versus the number who reside in the area or outside of the area but come into the school.
Yes.
There's a chart
Yeah, there's a
some
report
plans
we
and
put out
interest.
annually as well.
Yeah,
Yes.
So I didn't know
That
if there was
shows
a way to do some kind of heat map like that, I just thought that it would be.
There is census data, though, that does provide at the block level.
Yes, there's census data that provides, we can, block group is easiest to get, we can get block data depending on exactly what it is. But again, keep in mind that that's, even within the 10-year census, it's heavy reliance on statistics to get that information. And for most years, you're looking at, even less data. They call it like a rolling census, where you kind of average out what it might be over a 3-year time sort of thing. So you have the American Community Survey of 3-year, 5-year. And we do look at that. But for the numbers that we're looking at, it helps us because it gives general trends of, okay, in this overall area, maybe at this high school level area, does it look like the base population of student age children is growing, but we're not seeing that in our students? That is helpful, but any more granular than that, and the numbers just aren't, our numbers are so precise and the census numbers are so not precise, it's a lot harder to compare at that level. So that's where, and to do a heat map, you really need kind of area by area precise numbers. That's why I would say we can get information on students that are not enrolled, or children of school age who are not enrolled in DCSD schools, but it's a lot less precise, and we're making a lot more guesses as to what's happening than we are for if you're enrolled anywhere in DCSD.
I'm going to interject.
Yep, sorry, I know we're taking all this time.
No, you're good. Because I wanted to get you guys some time to work in groups and to get some one-on-one support in there. There's lots of maps. I've showed you guys these maps several times. I showed you where to find the maps on their wonderful website that these wonderful gentlemen put together for all of us. There are 5 big printed maps. 1, 2, over there 3, behind the station 4, and 5 if you need to physically get up and look at those maps that you guys discussed. Can I flip through this really quick? Yep. I have a mic. It's right there. If you guys need to discuss those maps, the active school maps, again, has every school, every program, the charters, the themes, all those things are on those, which is why we printed those maps out. There is a feeder packet that Kayla will send out to you guys. So this is what elementary school feeds to what middle to what high. And even though we say we do one-to-one feeder, we really do not. And this will show you that we really do not. This also shows you that we really do not for some areas. Okay? Not all areas have one-to-one feeders, but not all areas. There seems to be some concentration in where those split feeders are, and we need to take that into consideration.
That's only the first page, right? That's only the.
The packet, yeah, this is on the packet, but the packet has everything. That's why you got it in your Google Drive. All right, we're getting to work. These are our questions. They're in your Google Drive. These are probing questions, not expecting answers, probing questions to think about as we think about boundaries. Probing questions. And just like normal, you have a big space for other questions that you guys may come up with, and we'll, more than likely, I'll bug these gentlemen to get some of those answers. So they're in your maps, and I'll have our team, we'll walk around and get some information in there.
Could you clarify what's the difference between 1 and 2? Because I thought 1 was, yeah. Could you just explain what that is?
So one-to-one clusters would be that all the elementary go to a middle, all the middle go to a high.
But that sounds.
No clusters.
Split feeders. That sounds
So
the same.
if you're not one-to-one, you split.
Yeah.
So split feeder is not one-to-one, one-to-one is no split.
And both are used currently?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Depends on where you are.
Is that slide color coded? There's a slide where you have them listed and they're blue and orange, but it doesn't say if they're,
I took that one out. Don't worry about that one.
sorry.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, and so did Nancy. I was like, yeah, I was doing too much. Don't look at that.
Clear on that link though.
Yeah.
Where's the notes file? I don't see it.
I'm about to share it with you
Oh,
again.
got it, okay. Oh wait, was it in an email? I'll just find it. If you-
No, it's okay. I'll share it with you.
All right, we'll come around. All right, we're gonna bring it back center. It's hot now, I know. The cafeteria is freezing though, you wouldn't like that. All right, so per usual, we'll do a quick little share out, just for time's sake, maybe give us 1 or 2 highlights. But before we do that, again, so this next meeting, well, 2 things. I have been hearing like, it's so much information, we went through it so fast. We're gonna keep coming back to all of these things, right? We're giving it to you like pretty quick and dirty, but we're coming back to all of it. We will reprint, we will reiterate, we will go back over. Kayla has compiled all the questions from the first 3 months. We'll add these in there. We're getting people to answer them. So we'll use this kind of as the grounding basis of our data. Got to still look at some survey information to get to you guys. So we're getting it. So don't feel overwhelmed because we'll be kind of looking at this for a while. Outside of some of the enrollment data, which we update each October. So we'll be kind of maybe refreshing that piece a little bit. But we'll be looking at this data over and over again, okay? And part of the reason we wanted to give you all that up front is so the next kind of 3 months is us figuring out how to create these guiding principles for buildings, boundaries, and programs. And so we'll do an exercise as a whole committee in February. And when we think about guiding principles, there's a lot to consider, like historical context, especially here in DeKalb. Definitely have to consider that. What would be important to that process, guiding principle, who gets impacted, who loses, and who gains is a real conversation that we have to have in DeKalb. We do have some frameworks, some visioning, sorry, I'm like echoing. Some miracles frameworks, there's visions and mission. I hear myself. We'll be kind of considering all those things. So we'll go through an exercise together. We will not be developing the principles in February. We'll take some time in our individual committees to do that, but we just want to kind of set the foundation for everybody all at once. All right, who's going to kick us off? Boundaries. Oh, who's going first, Kayla?
Sharing out.
All right.
Okay, I got you.
Kayla has the.
Hey, friends. All right, so we. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. Okay, now I'm all in a weird spot. We got through those first 3 questions, but I think we kind of got to the 4th question too, and we have a lot of questions.
Of course.
So, we actually in our group
Top 2 things. Top 2.
Just top 2.
Mm-hmm. And we could stop.
Okay, I'm just gonna go with the top 2 questions.
What would you guys have some deep conversation about? Top 2.
We did. All right. So we talked about the big thing we talked about was all the information, and we talked about how we can build support from families. Was like kind of our end goal, which I think was I feel like that was our most brilliant idea. We think there needs to be like a public acknowledgement of how muddled this is, like of the inconsistency in the past, and like that we're developing these guided principles, and that these guiding principles are how we're going to move forward. And like this is going to make things better, and then be transparent with that process moving forward, because that seems to be that's going to be the biggest thing, because we have to convince people that maybe there won't be losers. Maybe we can all win, and maybe it's going to be difficult. So I guess the other thing I'm going to bounce off on as our second idea is we thought about what if there were no boundaries. We tried to embrace the creativity of that question, and we imagined this like existence where we get to know students and their needs, and then those students are sent to schools based on those needs. Like maybe we have a school for people who need help reading, or whatever their need might be. But then we talked about how transportation and like so many other things. And then we were like, well, what if we did that by region? And then we got all muddled. So there you go.
All right, team. Good job.
All right, you guys, when are you going to take it over?
Top 2 hot topic items in your group.
I guess I have to stand up. All right. So similarly, we talked about regions. We spent a lot of time talking about school choice and what's driving parents and families to use school choice or utilize school choice. Are students really getting something different if they're utilizing school choice? And we talked about opportunities for maybe limiting the numbers of choices that we have and the number of programs that we have and offering those in each region so that you don't have to travel across the district in order to access every program.
Hearing a theme here.
And utilize those resources to make sure that every child, no matter where they live in the county, has access to high quality education and is building a sense of community around the clusters that we have.
Nice. Thank you. Good job.
Team one.
And I say that a theme because it's not just you guys that are talking about how do we cluster things in regions so families aren't traveling all over to get what they need. Heard it in other committees.
Yeah, me. Sorry. I'm going to stay seated so I can, is that okay? They want me to stay. God dang. Okay. I have like I can barely read without my glasses on. Now you want me to take them on. Okay, so we kind of had similar conversations. We did talk about, we did talk a lot about, because two of us are in the Lakeside cluster, and so we have a high prevalence of non-English speaking students. And so one of the things that we talked about is trying to make things easier for families that aren't familiar with American schools, period. So they come into a cluster or they come into a school and they don't even know how schools are broken down, elementary, middle school. It's different from the country they may have come from. And so how do we help those families? And then how do we help the students get those needs that they have with learning how to speak English and navigate schools and navigate their future and all of those big questions. So we also talked about something similar with having theme schools. We like having the idea of like an art school and maybe an engineering school or a nursing school, just to help with future careers that may not be college-bound students, but they want to go into good careers with good salaries. So how can we partner with industries that are here in the state to create some of these things, like partnering with Kia to create auto shops, not just at one school, but multiples across the district, which was something similar to, I think, what y'all said over there. With the film industry for kids who are interested in that, with the music production industry, how can we partner with those industries that are already here? When we talked about no boundaries, our first thought was, oh my God, that's chaos. And how we can't envision it at all, especially with transportation being the biggest issue. So I think that's a reoccurring theme with everybody, that transportation is the biggest issue with that.
Yep.
So anyway, that's us.
Thank you. And I think there's an example, a few people asked, of a no boundary, or at least have attempted one in New York. But if you've never been to New York, transit is amazing. So that's probably how they got away with it. I don't know that MARTA could yield similar results, but it's nice to think about.
But in the imagination, maybe we work with MARTA.
Hey.
We second your logistical nightmare reaction to
They
the no
figure it out.
boundaries. Outside of that, we spent some good time talking about advantages of the one-to-one feeder clusters, building strong community, maintaining steady and consistent social environments and relationships for students and families, encouraging collaboration for the school leadership, staff, and students within those clusters. But we did have someone who grew up with cross feeders, and that was just what they knew, and they did not have a negative experience. So we will note that. And then how do we support families in reimagining process? Communication. Marketing and PR. Just more transparency and honestly building trust back in the community. Yeah. One of the things that I brought up and we kind of seconded is so much of it is just this folklore that's passed on from one generation to, not even one, like every 5 years, it's like, well, 5 years ago you do that. Well, talk to so-and-so, and they're going to tell you 10 years ago they did this, and then it's just like word of mouth.
Yeah.
So just putting the facts out there and being as transparent as possible to rebuild that trust.
And creating whatever we're doing, something that is consistent.
Oh, we
and
did talk
something
about
that can be done so that when
That can
families
cycle.
know it's coming.
Yeah.
They don't understand.
Yep.
Yeah.
So.
That's fair. I will push on the PR piece. I've asked. It was budget time, so I was like, so communications. Want to budget a PR person for student assignment and big projects? Yay. I've asked.
So for us, 2 points. One, clustering creates the illusion of predictability and stability for a lot of families, I think. So for example, parents are going to buy a home, if they can buy a home. They're going to buy a home thinking I can attend this specific cluster or school, and if you mess with that, woo, they're not buying into DeKalb. They're buying into that school and that cluster. So, in high rent areas, we talked about it's different. It's a more transient population. That's one reason why it's flipping 30%. We talked about that. So we talked about, okay, no boundaries. What about that? First thought, chaos. It's just chaos. DeKalb's too big. We don't have transit. We brought that up. Or we'd have to rethink transportation as a whole. So we thought, okay, what about cluster-based boundaries? Meaning you have this option to attend this elementary or middle, high school, doesn't really matter, but as much. But you could pick one of these clusters, elementary schools. Still transportation cost to that because you have a wider area now. So that's to be thought about. Or maybe the next over cluster. Example, Austin Elementary in Dunwoody is way under capacity. Ashford Park and Montgomery, which my kids go to Montgomery, way over capacity. Ashford more so than Montgomery. Give them an option. You can go to this other school, which may have other benefits. It's at a cost, though, right? Because you're not going to be in your proximity school, but you will have a school that's not over capacity. So they could opt in potentially as an option. Where do no boundaries work? It seems to work in school choice and magnet. People are more willing to go a further distance that's not in their neighborhood for the benefit that they get. How far can you push that without getting too much blowback? Also, let that be the flex. Can those schools move more often? Meaning you can't move a neighborhood school because it's in that neighborhood, but you can move a magnet school if you need it. You need capacity for your area because that's changing. The magnet school is what can change.
Like you can't have it all.
Yeah, can't have it all.
All right. We are getting into some reimagining ideas. I like. Yes.
One of the things that we talked about is we would like more data because if we're talking about programs such as a mechanic program or so on, what are the costs and what is the minimum size? Because like I just said, I know that there is a lack of behavioral health specialists. We need more psychologists and so on. I can imagine a psychology program just needs people. But if you were trying to train someone on robotics, you need stuff.
Yeah.
So you can't have robotics everywhere without cost. So if we had more information, what do these specialized tracks, what they cost, what's the minimum number of kids you need to make it feasible, that would be helpful as we imagine.
Yep.
Arts programs, music programs, specialty programs.
Thank you. So as we get kind of into this next phase of things, I'll be really pushing us on our purpose and non-purposes. And I'll say this again, we're really going to be talking about what should we do, right? What should the possibilities be? The how is an entire separate phase. That's implementation. That's going to take way more people on the district end to figure it out. Because then I'll have to come back and say, like, this is what we said. Here's what's actually feasible, right? So there's kind of going to be a little bit of ping pong with that as we get to here's what we would love to see based on the data that we have. We're not going to have a bunch of every single piece of data set is not going to be comprehensive. It's just not, right? I've found gaps. We've all found gaps. I'm getting as much as we can. We'll have to make recommendations based on what we have, and then how it happens. We'll probably be able to see a little bit based on what we know, but that really is going to be on the district end to say like, hey, we decided that there should be these cluster options. Now I have to go to registration and say, hey, how can this actually work? Like, is this logical? So I could take it back to the committee and say, like, some of this is, but here's some things we might need to tweak before we take the recommendation to the board. So my job is really going to become, especially starting in the fall, like this kind of ping pong between what we're starting to boil up as a recommendation and see if it's actually feasible or not. Yep. You got a mic with you? Oh. Sorry.
Thank you. So kind of along the lines of what we've touched on a little bit about communication to the community and everything, how are we communicating to the board along this process? Because if we do all this work for 2 years and we also, I know you're here, but are the other board members going to other meetings and going to different area? Like you're going to one in the south and one, and then somebody else, are we jumping around? And so there's buy-in to a certain degree before we get to our recommendations. And we don't get a rug pulled out from underneath us like it's happened before.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'm going to push that to Dr. Horton because I'm not sure how he envisioned that part. I think there has been a little bit of a twofold. At first, I think he wanted board members here, and then he was like, that may like skew how people show up in these spaces. So then they were like, we're not going to require it. So I think at this point it's kind of at the board members' discretion, but it'll be my responsibility, I think, and Dr. Weaver, who is my chief, to get this information to them as much as possible. And then I think that PR, I'm going to really push on us asking for a PR person because we have a lot that we have to communicate. And so if we're going to do it well, I think there has to be some dedication to some of our high priority programs. And then I don't know how often I'm supposed to honestly be sharing SAP updates with the board. And we have new board members, right? So we have a whole like onboarding process that we'll probably have to do with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is absolutely a great point and an issue. I mean, I'm here because I want to be here.
Yeah.
And I come to North every other month and I come to Central every other month because I'm in both, but I actually watch all the meetings because they're posted online. So I know what's going on in South DeKalb as well. I know what feedback and comments have been shared there, but I believe I am the only board member who is doing that at the moment.
That's correct.
So.
Absolutely. While we're finishing up, please make sure you do those exit tickets.
This is actually, my question is actually something the board will probably also want to do. One of the issues is we have these principles, and each time we do redistricting, say, this is important, this is important, this is important, but then there's no weighing of these principles. For example, it's very important to get rid of trailers, but when you are actually talking to families in a community to say, if you have a choice of redistricting, going to a different school, or accepting trailers, they all say trailers are entirely fine. So the weights of the different options. And we have 3 new board members, so it'd be really important for them to sort of start thinking about, like, what are some of the, given the port policies, how do they feel, what are the different weights, what are some things that they find most important, because their own ideas about, these relative factors and what they feel is a priority, it would be helpful, because I think if the board has some ideas of which things they really feel strongly about, that can guide this process a little bit, not into the weeds, but just into the general principle. And that's something you can discuss with your fellow board members.
No, I just want to say, one question I had one thing that I thought about from the very beginning of this is that I was hopeful that there would be alignment and communication along the way, because we know when this eventually goes out to the community, it's going to be hard. And so there is potential for finger pointing, let's be very honest, between the district, board members, this committee right here.
Facts.
And I think that we should collectively think about that now and work together as much as we can now and eliminate that so that we are all working together along the way. But
Thank you.
that's something I would like to say.
Thank you. So I wrote two things. Well, I wrote several things down, but two things for sure. I will connect with Dr. Horton about board connectivity, alignment, participation, etc., just to make sure and to figure out what our cadence is on updating them, and get back with our communications person on the PR piece, because I think that is, if I learned nothing lesson from my last one, it's like, where are the PR? We can have every data point, T's crossed, I's dotted, it is still personal, right? It is still my child, my program, my boundary, right? So we have to figure out a better way of communicating. I put everything on our website. Now, how much traffic is actually going there and who's using it, I don't know, but I like to keep receipts, so those are our receipts, right? Like every video, everything is there, but bringing them along the way versus saying, and by the way, because you didn't come to the 3 community meetings, your boundary's now changing. Is hard, right? And so I will really spend some time to push on what that PR piece could look like for us, because I agree. I think that's important, and I think you brought that up like months ago. I've been working on it, massaging it a little bit. I knew there are some budget pieces to it, so I've been massaging it. So it's hopefully gonna get it.
With the communication and marketing piece, it's not just to the internal constituents. This is a community.
Yeah.
DeKalb County, even though it's big and awkward and kind of messy, is a community. We live in neighborhoods, we live in cities, we live in a county.
Yeah.
It's bigger than just the internal.
Who's in DeKalb? Yeah.
Our internal constituents.
Yeah.
And that communication piece has to involve the people who aren't sitting at the table.
Absolutely. So I will work on it, do my best, and I'll keep you guys updated. Happy New Year, and thank you so much for coming back. Thank you so much.